Imagine a neighborhood where everyone knows your name, where every morning is met with warm smiles and friendly greetings. This is Olanfami Street, nestled in the heart of Lagos, a street bustling with life. Among the familiar faces was Baba Ari, an elderly man who had lived on the street for decades, watching everything unfold from his front porch as he sipped his hot pap. Then there was Chidinma, a lively young woman known for her quick smile and kind words, and Mama Yabo, the owner of a newly opened umla joint that had quickly become the pride of the street. The air on Olanfami Street was always filled with laughter, chatter, and the aroma of freshly cooked food. Children played along the narrow paths, their laughter echoing off the walls of small, colorful houses. Neighbors leaned over fences, exchanging stories and gossip, while vendors called out to passers-by, selling everything from vegetables to handmade trinkets. The sense of community was palpable. Everyone knew everyone else, and no one ever felt alone. But this was also the story of two barking dogs that no one could understand. Mr. Benson, who lived in a modest house near the end of the street, owned two large dogs, Bruno and Rocky. Usually, these dogs were quiet and friendly, known for wagging their tails at familiar faces and barking only at strangers. But ever since Mama Yabo and her family arrived, something had changed. Bruno and Rocky had suddenly turned into growling, barking guardians whenever they saw the family pass by. It wasn't the usual territory protection, either. Something about their barking felt different, almost as though the dogs were trying to tell the neighborhood something. A warning. Every time Mama Yabo or her children walked past Mr. Benson's gate, Bruno and Rocky would erupt into a frenzy of barking. Their sharp barks pierced the air, and their growls were low and menacing, as if they sensed something that no one else could. At first, Mr. Benson thought it was just the dogs being protective of their territory. Perhaps they were simply not used to the new faces in the neighborhood. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that something was unsettling the animals. The more Mama Yabo and her family came and went, the more agitated the dogs became. It was as if they could see something that no one else could, something hidden beneath the surface. In this cozy yet mysterious environment, one thing was clear. Something about Mama Yabo's family wasn't quite right. They were polite, always greeting their neighbors with a smile. Their food was delicious, drawing people from all over the neighborhood to their small umla joint. The joint had quickly become the pride of Olanfami Street, a place where people gathered to share a meal and enjoy each other's company. Yet, despite their kindness and the warmth of their food, there was an air of secrecy that surrounded them. People whispered, but no one dared to question the family. After all, they had done nothing wrong. They kept their shop clean, treated their customers well, and never caused any trouble. But the dogs knew. Every morning, as the sun rose and the street came alive with activity, Bruno and Rocky would begin their relentless barking, their eyes following every movement of Mama Yabo and her children. It was impossible to ignore, and as time went on, the murmurs among the neighbors only grew louder. Why do the dogs hate them so much? Chidinma asked one morning as she passed by Mr. Benson's gate. She watched as the dogs barked furiously, their eyes fixed on Mama Yabo's shop down the street. Mr. Benson shook his head, a puzzled expression on his face. "I wish I knew," he replied. "They've never acted like this before." Despite the unease, life on Olanfami Street continued as usual. People went about their daily routines, children played, and the aroma of umla wafted through the air. But beneath the surface, there was a growing sense of tension, a feeling that something was not quite right. And still, every morning the dogs barked. If you're enjoying this story, remember to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and whether you've ever encountered a mystery you just couldn't solve. Keep watching, because what unfolds next will truly astonish you. Mama Yabo's umla joint had quickly become the place to be on Olanfami Street. The aroma of freshly cooked umla and stewed meats would draw customers from blocks away, including Baba Ari and Chidinma. Despite the warmth of the joint, there was something unsettling beneath the surface. People started to notice odd behaviors. At first, it was subtle. The greetings stopped. The warm smiles vanished. Chidinma, who always made it a point to greet the family, found her efforts ignored. Not just once, but repeatedly. The first few times, she shrugged it off, assuming they were simply too busy to notice. But soon, it became clear that it wasn't just a matter of being preoccupied. The family's demeanor had changed. There was no warmth, no friendliness, just a cold silence that had never been there before. Soon, people started avoiding eye contact with Mama Yabo and her family. It wasn't just Chidinma who felt the shift. The neighbors who used to stop by for a quick chat no longer lingered. The cheerful shop that was once filled with laughter and conversation now felt cold and eerily silent. Even the food, though still delicious, seemed to lack the same comforting magic it once held. It was as if the joy that had once been infused in every dish had drained away, leaving behind something hollow. More unusual than the change in demeanor, however, was where the family seemed to live. Nobody saw them leave. No matter how late the hour or how unbearable the heat, the family stayed in the shop, a tiny building with no windows. On those sweltering Lagos nights, while everyone else took their mattresses outside to escape the heat, the family stayed indoors. The shop, with its single door and lack of ventilation, seemed an impossible place to sleep in such weather, yet they never stepped out. It was strange, and the neighbors whispered about it, each with their own theories. Maybe they have a secret air conditioner, Baba Ari suggested one afternoon, his voice tinged with sarcasm. But even he couldn't deny the oddity of it all. Lagos could be unbearably hot, and no one in their right mind would choose to stay inside a stifling, windowless room unless they had no other choice. It made people uneasy. It made them wonder what kind of people could endure that without complaint. As the dog's incessant barking continued, Mr. Benson grew concerned. Why were his friendly pets acting like this? Bruno and Rocky were not known to be aggressive. They were the kind of dogs that children could play with, the kind that greeted neighbors with a wag of their tails. But with Mama Yabo's family, it was different. Every time the family walked by, the dogs erupted in fury, their barks deep and menacing. They paced behind the gate, their eyes locked on the family, their bodies tense, as if preparing for an attack. It wasn't protection. It was a sign, but of what? Mr. Benson couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. He watched his dogs, their agitation growing each day, and he knew that something was wrong. Dogs, he believed, had a way of sensing things that humans could not. They could sense danger, they could sense fear. And whatever it was that Bruno and Rocky sensed, it made them furious. Chidinma noticed it too. She often saw the dogs from her spot at her mother's provision shop. She watched as their barking grew more intense each day, their eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or maybe anger. It unsettled her, and she found herself avoiding the shop more and more. The laughter that used to fill her days now felt forced, the joy replaced by a gnawing unease. The atmosphere on Olanfamy Street had changed. What was once a street filled with warmth and community was now shrouded in whispers and tension. People still bought their food from Mama Yabo, but they no longer lingered. They came, they ate, and they left, all the while avoiding eye contact, their smiles forced, their laughter hollow. Something was wrong, and everyone felt it. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface. And still, every time the family walked by, the dogs barked, their growls echoing through the narrow street, a warning that no one could understand. New Year's Eve arrived, and Olanfamy Street was alive with festive spirit. Fireworks crackled, laughter echoed, and families gathered on their front porches. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly cooked jollof rice and fried meats, blending with the scent of celebration. Children ran around with sparklers in their hands, their giggles lighting up the night as brightly as the fireworks above. Amidst the excitement, something unusual caught Mr. Benson's eye. The lights were still on in Mama Yabo's shop. It was almost midnight, yet the family was still cooking, still serving the few customers who came in late that night. Normally, the umla joint would close by 9 p.m., and by then, the street would have settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm. But not tonight. The shop remained open, the lights casting long shadows onto the street. As the family moved in and out of the small building, their faces unreadable. It was strange, but Mr. Benson had more pressing matters to attend to, celebrating the new year with his own family. Mr. Benson noticed another peculiar thing. His dogs were quiet. Not a single bark, not a single growl. They lay calmly in the yard, even as the family moved in and out of the shop. Bruno and Rocky, who had become notorious for their relentless barking at Mama Yabo and her family, now seemed utterly indifferent. They rested with their heads on their paws, their eyes half closed, as if they had resigned themselves to whatever conclusion they had reached about the family. Mr. Benson found it strange, but didn't dwell on it. He had a celebration to enjoy. Midnight struck, and the whole street erupted in cheer. Fireworks lit up the sky, and the neighbors shouted well wishes to each other. Mr. Benson joined his wife and children on their porch, clinking glasses of palm wine, their laughter mixing with the crackling of fireworks. The festive cheer spread across Olanthony Street, and for a few hours, all thoughts of strange neighbors and barking dogs were forgotten. The air was filled with joy, and everything else seemed to fade into the background. When the neighborhood woke up on New Year's morning, there was something unsettling waiting for them. The once bustling umla joint was completely empty. The door was closed, the lights were off, and the shop looked as though it had been abandoned for years. The pots, pans, and even the wooden benches were gone, as if the family had never been there at all. The bright, colorful sign that used to hang above the door was missing, and the shop's windows were covered in dust. Nobody had seen them leave. No moving trucks, no noise, nothing. They had vanished without a trace, leaving the shop barren, an empty shell of what was once the heart of the community. Chidinma was the first to notice when she walked down to buy some amla for her family's New Year's breakfast. She stood in front of the empty shop, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mama Yabo," she called out, her voice echoing in the silence. There was no response. She ran back to her mother's shop, her heart pounding. "Mama, they're gone." "The shop is empty," she exclaimed, her voice tinged with both confusion and fear. Her mother frowned, stepping outside to see for herself. The news spread quickly across Olanthony Street. Neighbors gathered around the empty shop, whispering and shaking their heads, trying to make sense of it. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. Did they move in the middle of the night? Baba Ari wondered aloud, his brows furrowed in confusion. But nobody had seen or heard anything. It was impossible for an entire family to pack up and leave without anyone noticing, especially on a night when everyone was awake, celebrating the new year. The mystery only deepened as people began to notice the details. No signs of packing, no leftover belongings, no trace that the family had ever lived there. The strangest part of it all was the dogs. Bruno and Rocky, who had been so aggressive towards the family, now lay quietly in Mr. Benson's yard, as if nothing had ever happened. They no longer barked at the empty shop. Instead, they seemed almost at peace, their previous agitation completely gone. Mr. Benson watched them, a chill running down his spine. It was as if whatever had disturbed the dogs had disappeared along with the family. The disappearance of Mama Yabo and her family left a void on Olanthony Street. The shop, once filled with the sounds of cooking and laughter, now stood silent and empty. The neighbors, who had once gathered there for a meal and a chat, now avoided the place, an unspoken sense of fear hanging in the air. The mystery of the vanishing family became the main topic of conversation, each person with their own theory, but no answers. And still, Bruno and Rocky lay quietly, their eyes watchful, as if they knew the truth that no one else could understand. The news of Mama Yabo's family's sudden disappearance spread quickly. People gathered outside the empty shop, whispering and speculating. The once vibrant hub of Alanfamy Street, filled with laughter and the smell of freshly cooked umla, now stood silent and desolate. The door was locked, and the windows were covered with dust, as if no one had lived there for months. Chidinma was among the first to notice the shop's emptiness when she arrived to buy umla that morning. She ran back to her mother, her heart pounding. "Mama, they're gone." "The shop is empty," she exclaimed breathlessly, her wide eyes filled with both confusion and fear. Her mother's expression darkened as she stepped outside to see for herself. Soon, neighbors gathered, crowding in front of the empty building, murmuring and shaking their heads. The entire street was abuzz with theories. Everyone seemed to have their own version of what had happened, and the more people talked, the stranger the theories became. Some believed that the family had been running from something or someone. Perhaps they were in trouble with the law, one neighbor suggested. Maybe they were fugitives hiding out here until they couldn't stay any longer, another chimed in. The idea of the family being on the run seemed to make sense to some. After all, they had never shared much about themselves, and their odd behavior only added to the suspicion. Others believed that the family was haunted, that they were spirits who had returned to settle an old debt or fulfill some unspoken mission. The fact that the family spoke in a language nobody could understand only added to the mystery. "They never really belonged here," one elderly woman whispered to her friend, her voice filled with fear. "They were different. Maybe they weren't even human." The idea of spirits or ghosts resonated with the older generation, who believed in the supernatural and the existence of forces beyond human comprehension. They pointed to the family's strange habits, how they never seemed to leave the shop, how they worked silently without joy, and how they vanished without a trace. Even Baba Ari, known for his wisdom and rationality, could not help but entertain the thought. But he also suggested a more plausible theory. He believed the family might have been struggling with mental health issues, explaining their sudden withdrawal and strange living arrangements. "Perhaps they needed help," he said, his voice heavy with empathy. "Living in that small, windowless shop for so long, no one can stay sane under those conditions. Maybe they simply broke down, and they had to leave before things got worse." The neighbors nodded thoughtfully, considering Baba Ari's words. It was true that the family had kept to themselves, rarely interacting with others. Perhaps their isolation had been a sign of deeper struggles. But even this theory did not fully explain their sudden disappearance. There were no signs of packing, no noises in the night. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but an empty building and a lot of unanswered questions. But the dogs knew something. Ever since the family disappeared, Mr. Benson's dogs had been calm, not a single bark or whine. Bruno and Rocky, who had once been so agitated by the sight of Mama Yabo and her children, now lay peacefully in the yard, as if a weight had been lifted from them. It was as if whatever had troubled them was now gone. Mr. Benson watched his dogs, puzzled by their sudden change in behavior. Maybe the dogs knew all along, Chidinma whispered to her friend as they stood near Mr. Benson's gate. Maybe they were trying to warn us. The idea that the dogs had sensed something sinister resonated with many on the street. Dogs, after all, were known to have instincts that humans lacked. They could sense danger, they could detect fear. And for months, Bruno and Rocky had barked and growled at the family, their agitation growing day by day. But now, with the family gone, they were calm, as if whatever threat they had sensed had vanished. It was an unsettling thought, that the family might have been hiding something dangerous, something that only the dogs could perceive. As the days turned into weeks, the mystery of Mama Yabo's disappearance became the main topic of conversation on Alanfamy Street. Theories continued to circulate, each more outlandish than the last. Some even suggested that the family had been involved in dark magic, that their disappearance was the result of some failed ritual or curse. They were too strange, one man muttered, shaking his head. They didn't belong here, but amid all the speculation, there was also a sense of loss. Despite their strange behavior, Mama Yabo and her family had been a part of the community. Their food had brought people together. Their shop had been a place where neighbors gathered to share a meal and a laugh. Now that place was gone, and with it, a part of the street's warmth and vibrancy. The empty shop stood as a reminder of what had once been, a ghost of the past that refused to be forgotten. Chidinma, who had once visited the shop every day, found herself walking past it, her eyes lingering on the closed door. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that something important had been left unsaid. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" she asked her mother one evening as they sat on their porch. Her mother sighed, shaking her head. "I don't know, my dear, but wherever they are, I hope they've found peace." The mystery of Mama Yabo and her family remained unsolved, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The neighbors continued to talk, to wonder, to speculate. But in the end, the truth was something that only the family and perhaps the dogs knew. And as life slowly returned to normal on Alanfamy Street, the memory of the vanished family lingered, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary places can hold the deepest secrets. As days turned into weeks, Alanfamy Street returned to its usual rhythm. Children played, neighbors gossiped, and the hustle and bustle resumed. The aroma of freshly cooked meals drifted from the houses, and laughter once again filled the air. But despite the street's efforts to move on, the empty shop remained a constant reminder of the family who had vanished without a trace, a lingering mystery that no one could forget. Chidinma couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to the story. She passed by the empty shop every morning on her way to her mother's provision store, her eyes lingering on the darkened windows, half expecting to see Mama Yabo setting up her pots, her daughters smiling as they worked. But it remained empty, its silence a stark contrast to the once bustling life it held. The cheerful chatter, the mouth-watering aroma of umla, and the warmth of the family were all gone, replaced by a haunting stillness. Chidinma often found herself staring at the shop, her mind filled with questions that had no answers. She wondered where they had gone, why they had left so suddenly, and why they hadn't said goodbye. It was as if they had been erased, leaving nothing but the shell of a building behind. The shop had become a ghost, a reminder of a mystery that refused to be forgotten. Mr. Benson, too, couldn't forget. Every day, he watched his dogs, Bruno and Rocky, now back to their friendly, easygoing selves, and wondered what they had seen, what they had known that no one else did. The family's departure had brought a strange peace to his pets, but it left behind questions that no one could answer. He often found himself standing by the gate, watching the empty shop across the street, a chill running down his spine. The dogs had sensed something, he was sure of it, but what? The neighbors tried to move on, but the disappearance of Mama Yabo and her family remained a topic of conversation. People speculated, whispered, and exchanged theories, but no one truly knew what had happened. Some avoided the shop entirely, as if afraid that whatever had driven the family away might still be lurking. Others, like Baba Ari, occasionally stopped by, peering into the darkened windows, hoping for some sign, some clue that would explain the mystery. Despite the unease, life continued. The children played, their laughter echoing through the street. The vendors called out their wares, and the neighbors gossiped, their voices filled with both joy and curiosity. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken understanding that Olanthony Street had changed. The disappearance of the family had left a mark, a reminder that even the most ordinary places could hold secrets that no one could fathom. Chidinma knew that life had to go on, but she also knew that she would never forget the family that had once been a part of their community. She often found herself hoping that, wherever they were, they had found peace. And as she walked past the empty shop each morning, she whispered a silent prayer for them, for the answers that might never come, and for the mystery that would forever be a part of Olanthony Street. Olanthony Street moved on, but the story of Mama Yabo's family was forever etched in the memory of the community. It became a story people told to newcomers, a cautionary tale about listening to the signs around you, especially those given by animals who often see what humans cannot. The mysterious disappearance was woven into the fabric of the street's history, a haunting reminder of the uncanny events that unfolded right under everyone's noses. The barking dogs had been a warning, but of what? No one could say for sure. Perhaps it was a warning of danger, or maybe it was a sign that something unnatural was happening on their street. Whatever it was, it had ended with the family's sudden disappearance, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The empty shop became a symbol, its closed doors and dusty windows a permanent fixture on Olanthony Street, a silent witness to the mystery that had yet to be explained. Children, who had been too young to understand when the family vanished, grew up hearing stories about the strange family and the barking dogs. They would walk past the shop with wide eyes, daring each other to peek inside or touch the rusty handle. It became a game, a test of courage, but beneath the thrill of it lay an unspoken sense of caution, a reminder that the world could be stranger than it seemed, and that sometimes warnings came in forms people were too quick to dismiss. Chidinma often thought back to those mornings, the dog's furious barking and the family's distant gazes. She realized that sometimes the most significant signs are the ones we ignore. The story of Mama Yabo was not just about a family that vanished. It was about a community that learned to pay attention, to trust the instincts of even the quietest among them. She had learned to trust her own intuition more, to listen when something felt wrong, and to respect the instincts of those around her, especially the animals who sense things beyond human understanding. Mr. Benson knew one thing for certain. His dogs had seen something. They had known something about that family, something that no one else had noticed until it was too late. Bruno and Rocky had tried to warn them, their barks filled with urgency, but their warning had gone unheeded. It was a mistake he would not make again. Now, when his dogs barked, Mr. Benson listened. He paid attention to the direction of their gaze, to the tone of their growls. He had learned that sometimes the difference between safety and danger lay in recognizing the signs that others might dismiss. And while the true story of Mama Yabo might never be uncovered, the lesson remained. Always listen to those who try to warn you, even if they can only bark. The empty shop still stood, a testament to the mysterious events that had transpired, and the neighbors still spoke of that eerie New Year's morning when the family disappeared. It was a story that refused to fade, a reminder that the world was full of mysteries that might never be solved, and that sometimes the ones who see the most are those we take for granted. Olanthony Street had changed, but the community had grown wiser. The barking dogs had left a legacy, one of vigilance, of listening, and of never dismissing the warnings that come from unexpected places. And as life went on, the memory of the family and the barking dogs lingered, a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages.